Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to learn how to calculate relative frequency. We've got three success criteria, and the first one is to understand what relative frequency is. So relative frequency of an event is the number of times the event occurs divided by the total number of trials. It's a way to predict the probability of an event. So to work out relative frequency, we need to use the relative frequency formula, which is very simply the number of times the event occurs divided by the total number of trials. Now this can be either given as a fraction or a decimal. Now we've completed success criteria 1, so we're going to move on to number 2, and this is to calculate relative frequency. So the table shows the results of spinning a four-sided spinner 50 times. So remember, frequency means the amount of times it happened. So the spinner landed on the number 1 18 times, it landed on the number 2 7 times, it landed on the number 3 5 times, and it landed on the number 4 20 times. And we're being asked, what is the relative frequency of spinning a 4? So that's the number of times the event occurs, 20, divided by the total number of trials, 50. And we can leave our answer as a fraction. Here's a question for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see your answer, press play. So for this question, we want what is the relative frequency of spinning a 1. So we want the number of times the event occurred, so that's 18, over the total number of trials, 50. In this question, Jack, Kim and Luke take it in turns to flip the same coin, and the table shows the results. So in the green question, we want to write down the relative frequency of Jack throwing the coin and it landing on heads. So we got heads 6 times out of 10 trials. The relative frequency of Kim throwing the coin and it landing on heads, so she got heads 13 times out of 20. And finally, the relative frequency of Luke throwing the coin and it landing on heads is 23 out of 50. So whose data gives the most accurate probability of the coin landing on heads? Well, the answer to this is very simple. The answer is Luke, as he did more trials. The more trials you do of something, the more accurate the probability of its happening is. Here's a question for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see what you should have done, press play. So in this question, Alice and Ben want to estimate how many blue counters are in a jar that contains 200 counters. Write down the relative frequency of Alice taking a blue counter. So she picked out a blue counter 45 times, and she did that 100 times. Write down the relative frequency of Ben taking a counter that isn't blue. So he did 20 trials, and he picked out a blue 3 times. So that means 17 times he didn't pick out a blue. So that's 17 out of 20. Here's another question for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see the answer, press play. So whose data gives the most reliable estimate for the number of blue counters in the jar and why? And the answer is simply Alice, as she did more trials. So now we've completed success criteria 2. So now we're going to move on to number 3, and this is to calculate expected outcomes using relative frequency. So expected frequency is the number of times you would expect a certain outcome in a set number of trials. To work out the expected frequency, you times the probability by the number of trials. So the table shows the relative frequency of spinning a four-sided spinner 200 times. How many times did the spinner land on red? So to work this out, we do 200, the amount of times it happened, times by the relative frequency for red. So the spinner was spun on red 60 times. Here's a question for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see what you should have done, press play. So we're being asked, how many times did the spinner land on blue? Well, the spinner was spun 200 times, and the relative frequency for blue was 0.1. So we times that by 0.1. So the answer is 20. The spinner landed on blue 20 times. This question says the probability that someone wins a game of chess is 2/5. If they play 30 games, how many times would they be expected to win? So for this, we do 2/5 times by 30, which is 12. So you'd expect them to win 12 times. This question says the table shows the results of spinning a four-sided spinner 50 times. Andrew is going to spin the spinner 40 times. So how many times should he expect to get a 3? Well, the relative frequency of getting a 3 is 5 out of 50. So if Andrew is going to spin the spinner 40 times, we times that by 40, and we get 4. So he would expect to get a 3 4 times. This time, Simon is going to spin the spinner 16 times. How many times should he expect to get a 4? Well, the relative frequency for 4 is 20 out of 50. So we times that by how many times Simon is going to spin the spinner, 16. So our answer is 6.4. Now we can't get a number 6.4 times. So we need to round it to the nearest whole number. So we'd expect to get a 4 6 times. Here's a question for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see what you should have done, press play. This question says the table shows the relative frequency of fish in a lake. If a fisherman catches 200 fish, how many should he expect to be carp? Well, we need to work out the relative frequency for carp, and we know it always adds up to 1. So we can take the other relative frequencies away from 1, and we're left with 0.2. So the relative frequency for carp must be 0.2. Now if the fisherman catches 200 fish, we can times that by the relative frequency for carp. So he should expect 40 of his 200 fish to be carp. Here's 4 questions for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see what you should have done, press play. Here are your answers. There's your green answer, there's your amber answer, there's your red answer, and there's your purple answer. So now we've completed success criteria 3. So now that we've completed the last objective, it's time to end the video. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you found it useful. Make sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out the other videos on the rest of the channel. I'll see you next time. See ya.